Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here with another Product Growth Leaders conversation. Steve, you and I were having a conversation a couple weeks ago about a product you and I know very well that we were surprised at some decisions made in some ancillary products. No consistency in terminology. And actually that conversation and that experience really got me to switch up. We pushed a topic back because I wanted to get this in because we talked about portfolio management like 2 or 3 years ago. I did forget to record that one until about halfway through. And I thought we should have this conversation. We're seeing it more. And I think that there's some stuff, as you and I are talking, I think, in my head, I've got portfolio management becoming a more important topic that we haven't talked enough about. I'd love to get your take on, both, how companies mess up with it, but, getting into our question of the week, again, topic of it is portfolio.
The nature of Agile is to focus way down low, into a task or a story. And it seems to me that few people are really looking at the portfolio or, the entire customer experience across the entire suite of products. And I think that's in the example we were talking about, there are so many places where, it works this way in one of their products and it works in that way in another one of their products. And why are these people not talking? And the answer is because they're not talking. I mean, as we know from our applied learning sessions, product managers never get together to talk about their products together. And I think in most cases, we're absent someone who is looking at the overall portfolio.
It's interesting, if you think about how a portfolio fits in it, obviously it's for a company that's scaling more. So you have enough products that you need to start, and May, your topic on this, I thought was amazing, thinking about the dividing, right? And breaking it down. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I remember reading somewhere that if your portfolio can't leverage your corporate core competencies or competitive advantage, maybe the portfolio doesn't belong there. And if your product can't leverage your portfolios, right, there's some level of foundation platform that we should be getting from a portfolio and from our corporate. And to me, I think that to your point with Agile, where everything's moved down to the granular level and people are looking there's no visibility across and no ability to leverage. And maybe this also goes to a place that where people, at least in my experience with our clients, people still struggle with the concept of core competency and competitive advantage.
Sure.
And I think that there's some similarities with portfolio management and competitive advantage and core competence because things we should lever on
Absolutely.
that. With that said, we got a great panel. And on Monday, we put this question. I believe it may be the longest character length question I've ever put out there, just because I had the secondary question on it. How are portfolio management and product management? Yeah, and I debated, and maybe I should have asked May, could I have done how are portfolio and product management similar? Like drop that second management, but I wanted to be specific because the topic was portfolio management. Sorry, I digress. How are portfolio management and product management similar? How are they different? And one of the newer members of the community who's been coming on really strong, I'm trying to get her on a call, Danielle Marvellis. This is only based off her experience, but portfolio management encompasses many of the same activities that are performed at the capability and feature level in product management. The key difference is you're now looking at sort of the group of product versus an individual product. And I think that there are times where portfolios are done that way, similar problems, similar market segments, and I think to me that's where it works well. There's times it's done. There's no logic to how products get put into a portfolio. It's really just a mutual fund or sense.
Well, I used to say, Grant, that a lot of the key to a good portfolio is it has the same buyer.
Yeah.
Right. And yet frequently portfolios are built on are based on who built it. Our Israel lab did this and our Sri Lanka lab did that. And so we organize them by, the developers, which even by the way I'm saying that, it's like, clearly that makes no sense. Who cares who built it? right?
Yeah. Because there's got to, this goes back to that competitive advantage. If we've got a brand, we've got a reputation, we've got some goodwill with a group of buyers, we should be able to bring them together. Uh, Paul Hatala, God, I was hoping he would be on this call. He said, product management equals problem management. Portfolio equals more products equals more problems. And he called it the notorious BIG transitive property of portfolio of product. I really want to dig into that. But then he said, in my larval stage, I was an electrical engineer. And boy, I wanted to ask about his larval stage. uh, May, last week when I announced this topic, you had more joy than I expected anybody would have about this topic outside of perhaps me. I guess that explains a lot about
Why we are friends.
yeah, exactly. uh, and you hit a huge nail right on the head in your first sentence. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about enterprise scaling. And that's where this comes in, right? You don't need portfolio management if you only have one product.
Yeah.
So take me through your dissertation.
I intended every time I write one of these, I intend for it to be short, but like then it turns into a huge long essay, and then I have like ideas for a much longer article. But
Wait,
anyway,
isn't that what Mark Twain? Everybody says he said, but I don't think he did say that. I sat down to write you a short note, but I didn't have the time.
something like that. So let's talk about enterprise scaling, right? So you have a product at some point in time. If you do well, your product grows, and then it grows, and then it grows, right? And there will come a point where you can no longer manage people and the messaging and how it all comes together. And at some point, it needs to split. And that split is exceptionally difficult because it's not just people management, it's the decision tree gets split too. So at that point, you also start talking about the strategic impact of what the company says now because it's no longer at the product level. Now scale that even more. Say you have 3 or 4 splits or 100 splits where you have portfolios of portfolios at that point. At the secondary portfolio level, you're looking at like basically just money. But at the first level portfolio, like where you have a group of people, the same buyer or like same enough buyer. The way I like to think about it is, do you have the same sales team? Because the same sales team will sell to the same group, and they therefore, if they're doing it right, have the same actual set of strategic sales targets.
Yeah,
Um, so that being said, like the way that's divided, you have to think about like the reason why it's divided is so that your people can focus on what's important. Because if you have two similar enough portfolios, but they're still very different, they're very different buyers. So, for example, I worked on a portfolio where we did financial risk and operational risk. The buyer at the end of the day is still chief risk officers, but very different actual impacted groups. Very like totally different like ways of thinking about the products itself. Like they didn't belong together.
yeah,
So those are two separate portfolios. At the top, the people talk like the higher level portfolio is still about like finance, but like you still have two different portfolios. So it's about being able to focus, and that divide is really important because then you don't have the conversation of like every 2 weeks, well, we need a developer here, so can we get a developer over here? No, it's controlled within your portfolio. Your people develop core competencies based on that financial risk portfolio, based on that operational risk portfolio. So you don't start mixing people around. You have that focus. And when you decide to like pull back from that one specific portfolio, it's just that one specific portfolio again that gets hit. And then like I wrote a bit about like what does the I kind of digress a bit, but what does the portfolio manager do versus what does the product leader do? And I think the portfolio manager basically acts as the CEO of that portfolio because you have to handle the board, who are the people above you. to tell
Yep.
you what to do, and you have to manage those sets of expectations and produce results, and you have to manage your team below you. Sometimes that role is merged with the head of product, and it works really well when you don't have to handhold the rest of the organization. It works really well when you have a really good culture where like it works out, you have a good system to communicate. It doesn't work well when nobody reports into that person and you do not have decision power. So like it's all about how do decisions get made? How do decisions get made, and does that make sense within the context of your portfolio and your larger organization?
A couple of things that really stood out to me. I've seen work really well when a GM of a portfolio or division was the product strategy leader, right? It makes sense. It is a extent, this is where there's some similarity to Paul Hatala's product management is problem management, and portfolio management is multiple products, so multiple problems. Somebody who understands it. And with that in mind, it would seem to your, I'm taking a little from what you were talking about with your risk management example. We need to make sure that we're solving, it's not just the same buyer, but it's similar problems, right? And there's sort of the way I view way strategy can work is, corporate strategy that at the highest level should be providing guide rails or boundaries, right? Boundary conditions for us. In a place that's big enough to have portfolios, then they guide the portfolio strategy, which then guides the product strategy, which then guides the go-to-market strategy. And it's sort of this cascade, providing boundary conditions. And I think it's, it's still about what problems are we solving, and we need to fit with it. Our product needs to fit within that portfolio's sort of macro problem view. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think one caveat is that if you have a portfolio manager, who is usually called a GM,
Yep.
and you have a VP of product at the same time, if your portfolio manager comes from product, they need to stop doing product. Or if they
Yeah.
come from sales, they need to stop doing sales. Whatever they were doing before, they need to let it go and let someone else take over.
Because
Or
they
else,
should have a cross-functional team helping them lead their portfolio, their division.
exactly, because it's a full-time job. And then
Yeah. In the success I've seen, I'm thinking of our friend Rick, Steve. The success I've seen with some people who've managed $1 billion. The most I ever got was a $300 million portfolio, which is still a pretty nice size portfolio. But I think that's where there's credence to this idea that maybe we need more people with product management, strategic product management experience, and CEO roles, because I think there's some value to be said there. But that's my bias. Thank you, May. Elliot Golden, or Clay, you want to chime in?
Yeah, just quick question. I like May's idea that it should be the same sales team, right? That tells you that it's the same problem. But it seems like I'm wondering whether that's a lagging indicator, because if you add a product to the sales team, how long is it going to take them to shift from, oh, good, more money, more commissions, until they go, oh, wait a minute, I can't actually sell this to my customer.
What I've seen the
It's a
problem
lagging indicator, I guess.
Yeah, and this is interesting because I've seen multiple companies struggle with new products because they can't get the sales force to buy into selling the new products. And it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that lens. Is it because the problem is different enough that they don't do it, or is it purely because the comp structure is such that they're not incenting them to sell something new, only manage the renewal?
Or they're just making so much money on the thing that they've already got, even if there is an incentive, they're like, well, learn nothing, continue making X, learn a whole bunch of new stuff, maybe make Y.
I want to point out that a portfolio has to be, it's not an indicator at all. It is a decision that you make as an organization. You create that portfolio, you intentionally create those divides. Like it has to be exceptionally intentional because there's a lot of work to make a portfolio, right? So it's not an indicator. Sales not being able to sell is an indicator that your portfolio might not be structured well, but it's still like a lot of work to reorganize and restructure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was going to say the same thing. Like, what is it? If killing a feature in a product is hard, killing a product is harder, and then restructuring a portfolio might be next to impossible given all the sunk costs, all the time that's been involved, and all the successes there. But at a certain point, making those kinds of changes can be incredibly tough.
Yeah, and Elliot, I'm glad you're chiming in. I didn't know it was possible, but I think somebody wrote a longer answer than May this week. You said very
Yeah,
interesting.
well,
That would be Elliot. Elliot.
yeah. Well, why use 5 words when 500 will do?
So talk to me about your thoughts. I like you looked at similarities, and you actually were so spot on the question because you listed 3 key similarities and 3 key differences.
Yeah.
So talk to me about your mindset.
Sure. Well, I wanted to kind of make sure that I was going deep enough into each one, and then the similarities were a little bit easier than the differences. This is why I spent more words on the differences for whatever reason. In my experience, I've worked on a lot of products, and I've also worked on probably portfolios within portfolios. So I have some experience in both over my time. But the similarities I listed out were essentially product management and portfolio management are very similar in terms of the skills that are needed. There's a strategic and tactical planning that's needed for both. It's a second similarity is that it is difficult no matter what, and there's a lot of information filtering and dissemination that is needed. And obviously, with portfolios being more complex, there's more work, but it's a similar skill set to receive information and then pass it along as part of the hub and spoke type of system that I believe product managers fit into. And then when I think about differences, there's a breadth versus depth. If you're a single product manager or a single product company, you're going deep on a single specific problem to get that product to fit. But when you get up to a portfolio level, you need to think about the entire suite. And I think May and Clay both push that out there. And then pivoting on that, there's an idea of focus. Like you have a narrow focus versus a wider focus. I call out the idea of where does your product begin and where does it end in these different processes. But a good portfolio, at least in the enterprise side for me, can often handle entire processes on their own. So you have both the entire process and then also the beginning and end type of situation. And then the final one I talked about was that change management agility. The idea that it's easier to make changes and big pivots when you have a single product or you're a single product company. But once you're in a portfolio, there's so many different dependencies, and it requires so much more proactive and reactive communication that it makes it harder to make those big changes faster. And that becomes a challenge as the organization grows. Even if they get into that portfolios, then it becomes infinitely more complex as well, which is why you get the individual companies kind of eating the lunch of the SAPs and the Oracles of the world in the ERP space.
I was having a conversation with a VP of product at a very big fintech yesterday, and he said that last thing you talked about was one of their biggest issues. It takes them so long to turn the ship to move. He said over a third of their budget is spent on tech debt, and over a third of their budget is spent on customizations, leaving not much money for actually creating anything new. So how do you do that? And I think that's the inertia you talk about. Steve, I have to ask you a question. I mean, Elliot, great job. I mean, I think you nailed a lot of my thinking on the similarities and differences. As we look at this, at what level, and maybe in May, I'm going to bring you into this too. I'm going to go to Steve first. Can product ops survive above a portfolio level at a corporate level, or does it need to be at a divisional level? I mean, if we're standardizing playbooks, right? If we're trying to get consistent in how we do stuff, is the portfolio or division level the right place for that?
Depends how you define a portfolio. Because like I've seen portfolios where it's like 2 products. I've seen portfolios that are like a whole suite of products that are sold to the same people, but it's extremely complex and you have like 1,000 people, right? Like, what are you trying to do? Right?
Yeah.
Like it's, you don't necessarily need product ops, right? It's what are you trying to do with your organization?
No, I get that, Steve.
Well, if product management is how you get products to scale, product ops is how you get product management to scale. I worked with a team a few years ago. They had 7 BUs. The product managers were in the different 7 pillars, and they all did everything different, both within a pillar and across the pillar. And it drove everybody crazy because this guy's prioritizing using way to smallest shop first, and this woman is prioritizing using Bryce, and this person is using ProdPad for their roadmap, and this one's using Excel. And there was just this utter lack of any sort of consistency within or without. So I would say that product ops wants to be a corporate-wide function, not a portfolio-wide function.
And maybe in my head, I'm thinking, at least some of the experiences I've had where I've been in a portfolio, we were a fully integrated portfolio. So design, development, sales, customer support, we were like a P&L that could have been separated and sold. And actually the one I'm thinking of did get separated and sold to a private equity firm as its own standalone company. In some cases, I think that if you were fully vertically integrated, you want it within. If you were leveraging shared services across, that's where you would want product ops at
but use this parallel as well. Product ops is to product management as DevOps is to development.
Yeah.
Shouldn't development be reasonably standard, even if it's, even if you just choose to take this BU and sell it as a whole thing? I mean, we still have to figure out how do we check in code every day? How do we do the mechanics of the way we build products? And the value of product ops is we learn some lessons over here that we can teach to 6 other groups, and they don't have to learn that lesson.
Well, so I'll throw this out there, posit this. Maybe it comes down to what does a corporation see as a competitive advantage? If they see product management as a competitive advantage, it makes sense to have it at that corporate level. If they don't invest in it that way, if they don't see product management as the strategic role, it's down to the leader at that divisional level or portfolio level to do it. So we've gotten off topic here. I just, in my head, I'm looking at all these different places I've worked or have had as clients, and it seems like it's done differently everywhere.
Well, and one challenge is when you say standardize on which team's variation of some solution, even trying to get a team to do industry best practice, like, hey, developers, can you give us estimates? And could you give me a sentence per day of estimate for what your plan is? Just so I kind of get comfortable with what's going on. And it's crickets. If you can't even get them to do best practices, how are you going to say, we know what you're doing is working okay, but Bob has this other slightly different variation that seems to be working great for Bob. Can you please do it that way?
Yeah. It's time for us to do another product ops one. We haven't had that conversation for a while as well. And we could definitely dig into that. Marco, you had one of the perhaps most, I won't call it vulnerable, but like just, it resonated with me. Admittedly, portfolio management is where I have had the least practical experience, because I think there's a lot of people who are in the community who listen to these calls, watch the conversations, who haven't dealt with portfolio management, right? You have to be at a certain level in the organization to even be thinking about portfolio management. If you're a product manager in a portfolio, you may not understand it as well. Or you have to be a company big enough to have portfolios. But you said that, it's where you have the least practical experience, but have been impacted the most in recent years. And I think this is something the better people can understand, even if they're not in that and understanding it from doing it. I think it's important. So talk to me about your head.
So few people know that I actually graduated from art college. So I have an art degree.
I did not know that.
So
you've been on these calls for over a year, and I'm just learning this.
I've got a very interesting vita, I would say. But anyways, I mean, so particularly looking at portfolios from an artistic point of view, a portfolio is a reflection of your work, right? And your skills and everything else. And every time you build a portfolio, every time you apply for a job, you kind of rebuild that portfolio from scratch. I mean, you have the works, right? But you're not going to show all the works. You're only going to show the works that you think is going to land the job. That's going to basically sell yourself as the product. So depending on whether I apply to Disney, to Pixar, to, well, okay, Pixar is Disney now, but it's all the mouse, or any other job, it totally depended back then, as I got out of college, what am I going to show them in order to prove that I have the right solution for the problem? And this is not the same every time. However, the portfolio consisted of this, I would say, set of tools and skills and statuses and abilities that I would combine in order to sell the solution. And I see it very much the same in the context of software portfolio management, right? It's every product, every tool is part of the greater whole. So what you're selling in this case is something that will solve your customers' problems. And this could be a combination of many components of this portfolio. Now, that being said, of course, what everybody wants is, and I'm going to bring up another analogy since I'm the master of weird analogies here, a German saying, and it's called the egg-laying wool milk pig. It's basically the animal that solves everything. It lays eggs, it makes milk, it provides meat, and so forth. And this is what everybody wants, right? Everybody wants this combination that just solves everything, that does everything. So as a result, what you try to do is try to pick the parts that you have. That's your portfolio. You have your portfolio manager that says, hey, we can solve this for you by putting all of these things together in this holistic view, this holistic solution, so to speak. And at the same time, too, I find portfolio management incredibly important because, again, it tries to present the company as the problem solver. What tools do you have in order to answer the market? And it also, a good portfolio manager will, in that case, provide insight into where's the gaps. Now, why didn't you get this customer? Because something was missing. You provided maybe 80% of the solutions that the customer wanted. And this is where the portfolio manager needs to be as much aligned with the corporate strategy as she or he is with the product managers who provide the components of this portfolio. So again, I think it's alignment in both directions. Yeah. Make sure that, again, as a company, you position yourself as an expert in field X and market X. At the same time, you also need to make sure that the product managers who provide these solutions can close these gaps and bring in these tools, and they need to work together. Because otherwise, and I've seen this is why I said I was affected by this the most, where I've been in this siloed product management organization that just focused on this one thing. Again, the one-trick pony. We did this one thing really, really well. And then a customer came and says, yeah, but we also want to do ABC. Why can't you do that? And it always ended up being, well, we don't know. We actually don't know what the rest of the portfolio holds. We have to go back to our solution architects, right? Yeah. Who may be the closest to actually knowing how we can put these pieces together. And this is absolutely disastrous, I think, from an organizational perspective. You need to understand how it all fits together and how we can combine it. Otherwise, it's not a portfolio. Otherwise, it's just a conglomerate of tools that may or may not work together.
It's interesting. And your comment on how it has to fit above to the corporate and then down to the product, I think goes in line with what I was talking about earlier, where it needs to, this cascade, these boundary conditions, and in the portfolio just becomes an intermediate step as we've gotten bigger, to May's point, as we have to divide. Steve, your comment in the chat got me thinking, right? Many portfolios are integrated through product naming. I wrote the piece on productizing services, and we said it needs to start at a product marketing level. Can we tell the story to the market and positioning, right? Mm-hmm. What problems we're solving, and with naming, maybe it goes into that. Can we bring them together? The next level we had there is there standard methodologies for delivering? Do we have standard ways within this portfolio of how we do things? And the final one was automation, and that gets to a platform. We've been talking about this for half an hour now. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that, in response to, we've got myriad products that we're building internally, plus the 17 acquisitions that we made, and bringing bringing consistency and a common user experience together is difficult. And many companies don't like things that are difficult. So instead they use what we used to call, integration through shared shipping container. We put all the disparate products in one box and then refer the box. But yeah, I think first step is, can we tell the story? Do these parts fit together in a way that tells a plausible story? And then, you have to get into, the hard work of turning these individual products into products that work like one another.
Our friend Scott Verkler has said, when he's done integrations and acquisitions, the first thing he touches is the UX, because even if it doesn't work, even if it's not integrated in the back end, you want them to think it's integrated when they use the product. And maybe that's, start with positioning and messaging and naming, and then go to UX, because that's going to be where it starts. May?
I want to bring up the idea of Conway's Law. So Conway's Law is an adage that states organization design systems that mirror their own So the way organizations are structured reflects our communication structures. So when you create these divides, that is who's going to communicate with each other. Like it's very difficult to communicate beyond your portfolio, because like if you hear about going up the silo, across and then down, that's what happens when you create portfolios, right? So from a much larger organizational perspective, you have to keep in mind that that's what's going to happen when you create these divides. But it also allows you with a lot more creativity and freedom within your portfolio. So I think a lot of the things that we're talking about, yes, it is to help us structure and think about and focus, but like there's only a certain amount of scope we can focus on. So like this is why it's important, but it's also going to have some negative side effects like whenever we talk about it. So like there is like a desire to be cross company, that we know what everyone is doing, but when you talk about the scale of like an IBM or like even a 10,000 person plus company, like our human, like we are at the limits of human cognition, like we cannot learn that much. So it is really important for us to create these divides, but also like just be cognizant that it does limit communication outside. And I think where the portfolio manager comes in is at that like larger corporate or portfolio strategy, to say like, hey, within this group of portfolios or within our company, this is how these portfolios work together. Because you don't have a portfolio manager if you only have one portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. So is Conway's the one that talks about the most any human can manage in contacts is 150 people or something like that?
No, that is, hang on, I wrote about it recently. I'll find it.
No, but it makes me start thinking, are you optimizing for a portfolio? If you're asking somebody to work across 200, 300, 500 people and having to engage and communicate, it becomes more difficult. Again, we're going down a rabbit hole. Before we head to the poll, Clay, you've weighed in throughout the conversation, but I haven't had, you didn't sort of get to specifically, address the question. I don't know if you had anything to add.
No, I don't have a lot of, I don't have any experience with this either. I'm right with Marco, and I haven't even been directly affected by it. So it's all theoretical for me.
All right, cool. Well, in theory, we asked a question in the poll.
Before you leave the point, however, I did work with a team years ago, and I was teaching product management, of course, and the CTO came in and said, you know what I really need? I need like a portfolio roadmap. And I'm like, well, why? I mean, it's hard enough to get these guys to do a product roadmap. Why do you need a portfolio roadmap? And he said, because last year, 3 teams built the same function for 3 different products. And I certainly would have rather built it once and use it 3 times.
Yeah.
And who's, and it's that portfolio umbrella over all the products that's saying, wait a minute, yeah, this product needs tables, that product needs tables, that product needs tables. Let's do that once and use it 3 times.
No,
or 17
completely.
times.
And we're going to hit that in the poll, that actually, if we have time for any of the questions, we can hit that there. So Thursday, we put this question: where does portfolio provide the most value? Aligning strategies and initiatives with a corporate strategy, focusing product strategy, identifying redundant efforts or functionality, and allocating limited results. It was interesting because there was a conversation between Paul Hatala and David Meese and the comments on where could it or where does it? And I said does, so it's sort of the, I said does and I voted could. Steve, is this where you might have gone for the allocating limited resources? I mean, that was sort of or focusing product strategy. Oh, actually, sorry, redundant efforts. That's where David went.
I probably would have gone to redundant efforts. But before we actually go to your poll, I want to rant briefly about the 4th thing. You do not want to move resources between portfolios. You don't even want to move resources across product. And everybody thinks they can do it, and everyone fails at it. So that said, thank you for the thumbs up, May, and back to you, Grant.
Actually, I'm going to comment on that. I did have one client I worked with who had a tech lead, design lead allocated at the product level. And then the rest of them, just coders and stuff, were portfolio based. And as a team, the product management team, each quarter would say, I've got these people allocated, but we think this is more strategic. I'm going to give some of my fungible resources, my tradable resources to this other initiative. So I think there's ways you can do it. Maybe it's a whole nother conversation, but
it may be, but it certainly isn't. This week, I want 7 people working on product X, and I'm going to pull some people from over there.
No,
I could see it done on an annual basis, but you also said the word coder, which I despise. Programming is art. It's not coding, and it's a slur.
Okay, I understand that.
Okay.
I will be honest, and I'm going to agree with Steve just to get on good terms with him again, and say that if I'm thinking in the current terminology, identifying redundant efforts or functionality is, and I've seen it work at many of my clients where they can do it that well. Aspirationally, I voted aligning strategies and initiatives with a corporate strategy. I think that's where it should have the most value. But, Paul's question on could or should or does made me think about it after the fact. May, and is that Marco? Did you vote for aligning as well, or did you not vote? You did?
Indeed, yeah.
So I'm going to go to May first, then Marco, and their votes for aligning strategy.
I think I already said my piece.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah, basically, it's like you have a portfolio of products. Let's make sure it's aligned, but also you want to make sure it's aligned with your top level, like the people on top of you. Like if that's your board, if that's your portfolio of portfolio managers, like who do you need to align to? What are the other people kind of peripheral to you? And how do you leverage that to make your specific portfolio more successful and make sure all of that is communicated through to your leadership within your portfolio? So it's like that translation layer that needs to go through this one bottleneck somewhere,
Steve, she fits in so well. She aligns with me ideologically, and she says, I've already said my piece, and then speaks for a minute, just like you.
I have nothing to say. Let me add to that for 3 minutes.
Marco, thoughts?
Actually, same here. There was a point I was trying to make: the alignment in both directions, right?
Yeah.
The holistic view. Unless you have this conglomerate of puzzle pieces that may or may not fit.
Yeah. Clay, you came in on the focusing product strategy, and just for those who aren't following the notes, Dutch by mistake clicked on allocating limited resources when he meant focusing product strategy. So that would have been in second place with 28%. So Clay, any thoughts on, you want to share your take on that?
I have to admit that, and I can't see the name there, Mr. Meese persuaded me in the chat that I actually liked his answer better. And I realized the difference is that and I can't read them, they're too small for me, but the reducing redundancy is an outcome and strategy is sort of a goal. And so I really appreciated that because in the end, why do we care about strategy, right? Because in my opinion, it reduces redundancy. And so I went for the outcome over the goal.
But you might, like I sort of switched from the aligning the corporate strategy to the identifying redundancies of efforts and functionality. You would actually switch from product strategy to that one if you had to revote.
Exactly. And because it's an outcome, it's a measurable outcome. And it gets us something. We know it's what's gotten us.
No, and you know, David to me won this one with his comment. It really made me. Ideally, I'd love to say it's the top one where I voted, but I think realistically, right now at least, and I said does, not can. I'll have to cut my words that way. Elliot, if you voted, it was after I pulled the graphic.
Yeah.
Did you vote?
I did. I voted for the aligning strategies. And the reason that I did that is I felt like if you align strategies to the corporate initiatives and you were being very intentional about it, the other items would flow through, where you'd be able to look at the resource allocation, you'd be able to identify those redundancies, and you'd be able to focus your strategy accordingly. So my thinking is if you start at that top level and have it aligned, you're less likely to experience those disruptions, and you'll also be able to have the other outcomes and outputs.
No, I think ideally that's what I went for, but more often than not, you know, I think Paul Hatala's note in the comments, I pretend that there is a corporate strategy, then align with it. Does that count? And I think that's to me one of the biggest issues. Often there is not a corporate strategy or even a portfolio strategy. So in the realistic of it, I went with the way I did. Steve, any last thoughts on this poll?
No, nothing to add.
All right. I'm going to try to hit a couple questions, so I'm not going to get to everybody on all of them, if I can even get my thing moving. Steve, this is going to your last answer before the poll, your rant. Is platform product management required for portfolio management?
I'm inclined to say yes to that. I think that I struggle a little bit because for most of the companies I visit, what they call is a platform is a product that they can't figure out who wants it. So they say we're building a platform, meaning we have no idea who the customer is. But in truth, the platform supports all the products in portfolio management.
Yeah.
And the customer of the platform is the products and the people who work on those products.
Yeah, and this goes to that, you know, the redundancies, like let's build it once, not 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And where I've seen portfolio management work, it's nice at that marketing level, but if you can get it at that platform level, it seems like that's where you can extract a lot more profitability. Or so. Any other thoughts on the platform? You know, is platform management required for portfolio management?
Well, let me flip that a little bit, I think. I mean, ultimately, the portfolio manager needs to be the one that's the tiebreaker. That person needs to have the ability to say, no, we're not going to create this thing in product A. We're going to create it in the platform, and you guys are going to use the API. And the developers say, well, I don't really like that. And you say, wow, tough shit. The portfolio says we have to do it this way.
Yeah.
So that person making platform and portfolio decisions also has to have the ability to enforce those decisions.
And to May's comment in the chat about that person then has to have a resource to, you know, resource ownership or something like that. Where I've seen it work is everything rolls up to the platform. They identify those similarities and redundancies, and they build those into the platform. Yet every single product team still had resources and budget to do the things that didn't make it into the platform, right? If we focus every product to be just what makes it into the platform, you're creating a stale, boring product and not customized enough for the product. So you need to have the resources to cover that gap from that 80% to get the full
Agreed.
100%. All right, I'm going to hit one more question. Is portfolio management a natural extension of strategic product management? This is sort of to the Paul Hatala. Product management is problem management. Portfolio is more products, which means more problems. Is it a natural extension? Is the product management mindset the right mindset to have at that portfolio leadership level? I've already said my piece and said I think it is. Anybody?
No.
I'm having a hard time saying no. It's one of those things like, oh, can I push back? It just seems like the obvious answer, but maybe it's just a term of art for what is actually happening, based on the fact that when portfolios happen. I think it's made so what is so well about when it actually happens to that intentional choice. The idea of once you create a portfolio, you then need to manage that portfolio as such, or else chaos reigns.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think we just end up doing it. I think like where it's missing, product leadership tends to step in because like we need that role in order to make decisions. And if that
I
role isn't done,
yeah, I wasn't speaking of the product manager role, but the concepts of strategic product management, market problems, segmentation.
but
Right.
again, like going back to last week's conversation, it's what we've been trained to do, right? Like
Yeah.
as product managers, you do the miscellaneous. Whatever's not being done, you end up doing it. And when you get to product leadership, whatever's not being done in order to help you do the job that you need to do, you end up doing it. So this is why like a lot of portfolio managers tend to be former product leaders, or like it's just a transition or it's an expansion of a role, whatever it might be. But I don't think it's a natural extension. I think it's just a thing that we end up doing, right? I mean, yeah, in a way, because we're like a lot more holistic, we actually think about the rest of the company. But I wouldn't say it's specifically a natural extension. It's just like what we end up doing.
It's a common outcome, even if it's not a natural extension.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that latter definition.
If not us,
if
then
you-
who?
Yeah, and if you have a strategic product manager as opposed to a secretary to development, then you're able to say, well, I've been interviewing customers and our existing customers are saying, we've got this problem over here that you haven't addressed yet, and we want to buy it from you. And you're like, oh, the product manager would not have heard, the secretarial product manager would not have heard that. Somebody has to be, actually actively listening to the market and not just to the salespeople.
And maybe this is a future topic of the week, and we're going to move to our closeout. What are the skills in a strategic product management? There needs strategic product management. And I think that when we talk about financial and business skills and being able to understand a P&L, to your point, it lends to having the skills. And Clay, I don't know where my mind is going. You said, if not who, then us. And now there's some song.
If not us, then who?
If not us, then who? There's some musical that has a lyric that, if not now, then when. Don't know what it is. Just hit my head when you said that, and May will probably find it and look it up and let me know. But let's get to our takeaways. And I'm going to start with Marco because he was quiet on that last round. Marco, what's your biggest takeaway on this?
Well, that portfolio management is just as necessary as product management and vice versa. I mean, they affect each other, right? Particularly if you're not just offering one product. And so again, it's all about alignment upwards to the company objectives, downwards to the product objectives. But at the end of the day, it's all about just offering the customer the solution that fits their needs the best.
Okay, I like that. Clay.
I think that something we haven't discussed a lot and that I experienced a little bit of is how difficult it is. Well, I mentioned it a little bit, to get the organization to actually change beforehand or afterhand. And they're both difficult. Afterhand is inertia. But even beforehand, I'm trying to do my job and you're telling me to wait and see how this other guy does it so I can see if I should be doing it the way he's doing it. And it sounds really easy and it's like we've got the obvious solutions, but people don't like being told how to do their job, even if it's an improvement. I had a friend who's a Burger King manager, and one of his customers came up with a better way to make the hamburger. And he's like, "What are you doing? That's non-standard. They'll expect that everywhere." Right?
Yeah.
Customers.
Yeah, I got it. Elliot.
The thing that stands out that I'm noodling on right now is when May said that portfolio management is not a natural extension. It's just something that happens. And it's something that is like rattling around in here. And it's something that I need to think more about in terms of, yes, it's just something that happens, but what should be the natural extension, right? So that's an idea of like, is there a better practice that could be thought of that could be delivered to many different organizations that are experiencing this challenge? So that's something that I'll be thinking about.
I like that. May.
Aside from the egg-laying wool milk pig.
Thank you, Marco.
Fantastic, by the way. I'm thinking about the lack of consistency between what a portfolio is, right? So I've drafted a piece where I've defined what I call a product portfolio just to help us focus a bit more in terms of what we're talking about. But this conversation's made me think about the different varying sizes of a portfolio and how that would impact what you actually do with it. So it's turning around in my head.
Awesome. My friend Steve.
If you're selling it, you need a product manager of it. So if you are selling your portfolio, then you need a portfolio manager of it.
Wow. Throwing some wisdom there. I'm going to build on that I think I've said, and maybe this is, specifically for companies with multiple products when portfolio management comes in. I've said, I think that product design or UX is probably one of the things that's less invested in than product management. I think portfolio management would fit right there. I think that it's a view that's missing out there where people aren't doing it. And the reality is, once you scale past 3-4 products, it should be treated as a portfolio, even if you don't have a portfolio manager because it's just your company. But once you have multiple portfolios, you need to be doing that. So maybe it's a skill base, maybe it's a mindset, maybe it's, to May's point in her thesis in the Monday question, it's about how do we better manage and divide to make sure we can do more, right? And I think that this is a thing that not enough people think about or do. I'm going to be spending some time like Elliot noodling on this, because I think there's some more to be said when it comes to this.
And before you leave that, I think that strategic product management is certainly underrepresented in the companies that we encounter. But I am reminded that business leadership is about working on the business, not in the business. Yeah. And product managers are working in the business. And some of them need to be working on the business at the product level, at the portfolio level.
I love that. That resonates a ton. What a great conversation on this. Some great things making me noodle and think and ruminate. There's going to be some more stuff coming out with this probably from me in the coming future because of this. So thank you guys for an amazing conversation, as it is every week. Next week, maybe it's related to this. Advice to the CEO on product management. So we're going to be putting a question in, which is about how can we give advice to the CEO on product management? We know product management better than anybody, or we should. What advice are we going to give to the CEO? So, gosh, what a great conversation today. Every week it is. I learn, I grow. I wait until after we stop recording and May goes, wow, that was a great one, because that always makes my week happy. But we do this every week, right? Monday, we put a question in the community. Wednesday, we put the poll in. And Friday, we have these amazing conversations that make us think, make us grow, change our perspective, give us new insight. Marco, Clay, Elliot, May, my friend Steve, thank you so much. We'll see you guys next week. in the community. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.